Hello, my name is Gary, and I was raised in the western United States, so I'm a native English speaker. I hope that you will enjoy this YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, 1828 to 1905. Chapter 3. A talk happens that could cost Phileas Fogg a lot. At 7:30, Phileas Fogg closed his front door and walked to the Reform Club, carefully stepping with his right foot 575 times and his left foot 576 times. The Reform Club, a grand building on Pall Mall worth at least £3 million, was his destination. He went directly to the dining room, which had 9 windows overlooking a beautiful garden with autumn-colored trees. He sat at his usual table, where breakfast was already set up for him. His breakfast included a side dish, broiled fish with reading sauce, a slice of roast beef with mushrooms, a rhubarb and gooseberry tart, and a piece of Cheshire cheese, all accompanied by several cups of the club's famous tea. At 1:13 he moved to the large hall, an elegant room with richly framed paintings. A servant handed him an uncut Times paper, which he cut with practiced skill. He read the Times until 4:15, then switched to the Standard newspaper until dinner. Dinner was similar to breakfast, and afterward Mr. Fogg went to the reading room and started on the Pall Mall at 20 minutes before 6. Half an hour later, several members of the Reform Club joined him by the fireplace, where a coal fire was burning. They were his regular whist partners. Andrew Stewart, an engineer, John Sullivan and Samuel Fallentin, bankers, Thomas Flanagan, a brewer, and Gauthier Ralph, a director of the Bank of England, all wealthy and respected men. Phileas Fogg, who had just peeked out from behind his newspapers, made a comment. He greeted his friends and joined the conversation. The topic, which everyone in town was talking about, had happened 3 days earlier at the Bank of England. A package of banknotes worth £55,000 had disappeared from the main cashier's desk while he was busy recording a small deposit of 3 shillings and 6pence. Naturally, he couldn't keep an eye on everything. The Bank of England is known for trusting the public's honesty. There are no guards or barriers around its money. Gold, silver, and banknotes are openly displayed and accessible to anyone. An observer once noted that while visiting the bank, he casually picked up a gold ingot weighing around 7 or 8 pounds. He examined it, passed it to the next person, and it eventually ended up in a dark corner for half an hour before returning to its place. Throughout this time, the cashier didn't even look up. However, this time things didn't go so smoothly. When the clock struck 5 and the package of notes was still missing, it was recorded as a loss. Once the theft was discovered, detectives were immediately dispatched to Liverpool, Glasgow, Havre, Suez, Brindisi, New York, and other ports. They were motivated by a reward of £2,000 and a 5% commission on any recovered amount. The detectives were assigned to monitor rail travelers arriving in or leaving London, and an official investigation was quickly launched. According to the Daily Telegraph, there were strong reasons to believe that the thief wasn't part of a professional gang. On the day of the robbery, a well-dressed, polite gentleman who looked prosperous had been seen moving around the area where the crime took place. A description of him was quickly given to the detectives, and some hopeful individuals, including Ralph, still believed he could be caught. The newspapers and social clubs were full of chatter about the case, discussing the chances of a successful investigation. The Reform Club, in particular, was highly stirred, especially since several of its members worked at the bank. Ralph didn't believe that the detectives' efforts would be in vain. He thought the reward offered would really motivate them to work harder, but Stewart wasn't so sure. As they sat down to play whist, they kept debating the issue. Stewart and Flanagan were partners, while Phileas Fogg teamed up with Fallentin. The conversation stopped during the game and only picked up again between rounds. "I still think the thief has the advantage," Stewart said. "He must be quite clever." "But where can he hide?" Ralph asked. "There's no safe place for him." "Come on." "Where could he go then?" Well, I don't know. The world is pretty big. It used to be, Phileas Fogg said quietly, handing the cards to Thomas Flanagan. Your turn, sir. The discussion paused during the game, but Stuart picked it up again afterward. What do you mean, used to be? Has the world gotten smaller? Certainly, Ralph replied. I agree with Mr. Fogg. The world has become smaller because we can now travel around it 10 times faster than we could 100 years ago. That's why I think the search for this thief is more likely to succeed. But it's also why the thief can escape more easily, Stuart countered. Please continue playing, Mr. Stuart, Phileas Fogg said. Despite this, Stuart remained skeptical. After the hand ended, he said, Ralph, your argument about the world getting smaller is strange, just because you can travel around it in 3 months. In 80 days, Phileas Fogg corrected. That's right, added John Sullivan. Only 80 days now, thanks to the new section of the Great Indian Peninsula Railway between Rothal and Allahabad. Here's the estimate from the Daily Telegraph. From London to Suez via Mount Sinai and Brindisi by rail and steamboats, 7 days. From Suez to Bombay by steamer, 13. From Bombay to Calcutta by rail, 3. From Calcutta to Hong Kong by steamer, 13. From Hong Kong to Yokohama, Japan by steamer, 6. From Yokohama to San Francisco by steamer, 22. From San Francisco to New York by rail, 7. From New York to London by steamer and rail, 9. Total, 80 days. Yes, in 80 days, Stuart said excitedly, accidentally making a false deal. But that doesn't cover bad weather accidents or other delays. All included, Phileas Fogg replied, continuing to play. What if the locals tear up the tracks or attack the passengers? Stuart asked. All included, Fogg said calmly, laying down his cards. Stuart, dealing the cards again, said, You're right in theory, but practically. In practice, too, Fogg interrupted. I'd like to see you do it in 80 days, Stuart challenged. It depends on you. Shall we go? I'd bet £4,000 that it's impossible, Stuart said. Quite possible, Fogg replied. Then let's see you do it. Fine. I'll take the bet and use my £20,000 at Barings. £20,000? You could lose it all with just one delay, Sylvan exclaimed. Unforeseen events don't exist, Fogg said calmly. But 80 days is just the minimum time, someone pointed out. A well-used minimum is enough, Fogg said. But you'd need to switch perfectly between trains and ships. I'll manage, Fogg said, unshaken. You must be joking. A true Englishman doesn't joke about something as serious as a bet, Phileas Fogg replied solemnly. I'm willing to bet £20,000 that I can travel around the world in 80 days or less, specifically in 1,920 hours, or 115,200 minutes. Do you accept? We accept, said Stuart, Valentine, Sullivan, Flanagan, and Ralph after discussing it among themselves. Great, Fogg said. The train to Dover leaves at 8:45. I'll take it. This evening? Stuart asked. This very evening, Phileas Fogg replied. He checked his pocket calendar and added, Since today is Wednesday, October 2nd, I'll be back here at the Reform Club in London on Saturday, December 21st at 8:45 p.m. If I'm not, the £20,000 I have deposited at Barings will be yours. Here's a check for the amount. A record of the bet was quickly drawn up and signed by all 6 parties, while Phileas Fogg remained calm and composed. He wasn't betting to win. He put up £20,000, half of his fortune, because he expected to need the other half to complete this challenging task. His opponents were clearly nervous. Not so much about the money, but because they felt uneasy about making such a difficult bet against their friend. When the clock struck 7, they offered to pause the game so Mr. Fogg could prepare for his departure. I'm all set now, Fogg replied calmly. Diamonds or trumps. Please continue with the game. Chapter 4. Phileas Fogg surprises his servant, Passepartout. Having won 20 guineas at whist and said goodbye to his friends, Phileas Fogg left the Reform Club at 7:25 p.m. Passepartout, who had diligently studied his duties, was very surprised to see his master appear at this unusual time. According to the schedule, Fogg was not supposed to be back on Savile Row until midnight. Mr. Fogg went to his bedroom and called Passepartout. Passepartout did not answer. It couldn't be him being called. It wasn't the right time. Passepartout, Mr. Fogg called again without raising his voice. Passepartout appeared. I've called you twice, his master noted. But it's not midnight, Passepartout replied, showing his watch. I know. I don't blame you. We leave for Dover and Calais in 10 minutes. Passepartout's round face broke into a puzzled grin. He clearly didn't understand his master. Are we leaving home, sir? Yes, Phileas Fogg replied. We're going around the world. Passepartout's eyes widened, his eyebrows raised, and he seemed ready to collapse from shock. Around the world, he murmured. In 80 days, Mr. Fogg responded. So we don't have a moment to lose. But the suitcases? Passepartout stammered, shaking his head in disbelief. We won't take any suitcases, just a carpet bag with 2 shirts and 3 pairs of stockings for each of us. We'll buy clothes along the way. Bring my raincoat, traveling cloak, and sturdy shoes, though we won't be walking much. Hurry up. Passepartout tried to reply, but couldn't. He went to his room, sat down in a chair, and muttered, Well, that's something, and I want to stay in one place. He started getting ready to leave without thinking much about it. Traveling around the world in 80 days? Was his master crazy? No, it was a joke. They were going to Dover. That was fine. To Calais. Also fine. Passepartout, who hadn't been to France in 5 years, would be happy to be back on his home soil. Maybe they would even go to Paris, and it would be great to see Paris again. But surely someone as cautious as his master would stop there. It seemed obvious, but still, it was true that this very home-loving person was actually leaving. By 8 o'clock, Passepartout had packed a small carpet bag with clothes for both him and his master. Still feeling uneasy, he carefully locked his room, then went downstairs to meet Mr. Fogg. Mr. Fogg was ready to go. Under his arm, he carried a red-bound copy of Bradshaw's Continental Railway Steam Transit and General Guide, filled with timetables for trains and steamers. He took the carpet bag, opened it, and added a substantial amount of Bank of England notes, which would be accepted anywhere. Have you forgotten anything? He asked. No, sir. My raincoat and cloak? Here they are. Good. Take this carpet bag, he said, handing it to Passepartout. Take good care of it. There are 20,000 pounds in it. Passepartout nearly dropped the bag, feeling as if the 20,000 pounds in it were made of gold and weighing him down. Master and servant then went downstairs. After double-locking the front door, they took a cab at the end of Savile Row and quickly headed to Charing Cross. The cab arrived at the railway station at 20 minutes past 8. Passepartout jumped out and followed his master. Mr. Fogg paid the cab driver and was about to enter the station when a poor beggar woman approached. She was holding a child in her arms. Her bare feet were covered in mud. Her head was wrapped in a shabby bonnet with a tattered feather, and her shoulders were covered with a ragged shawl. She mournfully asked for some money. Mr. Fogg took out the 20 guineas he had just won at cards and handed them to the beggar, saying, Here you go, my good woman. I'm glad I met you, and walked on. Passepartout felt his eyes water. His master's generosity deeply moved him. After quickly buying 2 first-class tickets to Paris, Mr. Fogg was crossing the station to the train when he saw his 5 friends from the Reform Club. Well, gentlemen, he said, I'm off, as you can see. If you check my passport when I return, you'll know if I completed the journey as agreed. Oh, that won't be necessary, Mr. Fogg, said Ralph politely. We trust your word as a gentleman. You do remember when you're due back in London, right? Asked Stuart. Goodbye, everyone. At 80 days on Saturday, December 21st, 1872 at 8:45 p.m. Phileas Fogg and his servant sat in a first-class train carriage at 8:40 p.m. 5 minutes later, the whistle blew and the train slowly left the station. It was a dark night and steady rain was falling. Phileas Fogg, comfortably settled in his seat, remained silent. Passepartout, still in shock, held tightly to the carpet bag containing a large sum of money. As the train moved through Sydenham, Passepartout suddenly cried out in despair. "What's wrong?" Mr. Fogg asked. "In my hurry, I forgot to turn off the gas in my room." "Well," Mr. Fogg replied calmly, "it will burn at your expense."